The ego is not your enemy, and the ego is not something to be destroyed. The ego will always be here with us. And on this spiritual path, the idea is not ridding yourself of the ego, but fully integrating it. We, as human beings, come alive and develop this sense of self-awareness. And the spiritual awakening journey is akin to a journey of self-awareness, self-realization, knowing oneself through the world. The existence of self implies that there be other. When we say I am, it implies that you are. It makes us separate. And our I amness also creates duality. The ego is birthed in duality. Our separateness creates the ego. If you've studied any ancient traditions such as Christian mysticism, Hermeticism, in Hinduism, Buddhism, they talk about making the two one, being the ego and the self, the soul and the ego, the little s self, the big S self. These two, as they become one, we integrate the ego. We begin to fully integrate our essence and put forth our gift into the world. The ego is not something that we kill. The ego is not something that we destroy. The ego is our essence that is within our body. Sure, it's the labels, it's the judgments, it's the attachments, the afflictions that we have in the world, but it's also our unique expression as an individual entity. An individual expression of the divine in this world is that ego. So we must honor the ego, we must revere the ego at the same time that we can honor our souls. Because oftentimes I've seen people on this spiritual path say like they're getting rid of their ego, like they live from their ego, which is understood. And living entirely from the ego and letting your afflictions, your desires, your aversions control you is not quote unquote spiritual, and it will take you away from God, away from the divine, away from yourself. But honoring the ego, honoring your desires, honoring and understanding yourself, because the journey of self-realization, the journey of self-awareness is an integration of the ego. We must ask questions to our ego. We must not deny, I have no ego, I have no ego. This doesn't make sense, because of course you do. The implication that I have no ego is an egoic statement. So it's a process of surrendering. It's a process of letting go of course the ego is going to be here. Of course the ego is going to be here. But if we can orient the ego towards love, towards joy, towards peace, then doesn't that make the spiritual journey all worth it? Doesn't the peace that we seek in the cessation, in the destruction of the ego, arise when our ego is at peace? When we find our ego in love, when we as separate entities can feel as one. It's not that we're ever going to just get rid of the ego and get enlightened. And sure, maybe you want to go live in a cave and you want to disappear from the world, that's fine. But if you're in the 21st century and you're leading this modern spiritual life, you're not going to get rid of the ego entirely. We've got to honor the ego. We've got to integrate the ego. And we have to ask ourselves these questions that allow us to live in our truth, that allow the ego to express itself fully, express itself wholly, express itself honestly, and not be caught up in the material, in consumerism, because the ego is easy to get caught up in shiny new objects. And I know my ego. My ego likes new shiny things. So does yours, probably. I see a new camera. I say, ooh, that looks nice. Oh, I can get that lens with that camera. Ooh, that looks like a fun trip. Headed out to Europe or headed out to Central America. Oh, surf trip. It's fun, shiny, right? The ego has these ideas of how life could be better, right? And when we talk about the destruction of the ego, when we talk about the cessation of the ego, we're simply not giving power to the ego's delusion. Because the ego will convince you that the future will be better, that the past was better. The ego will convince you to work for a goal that you'll ultimately be unfulfilled by. Then I'll be happy, the ego says. But this is not the way. The ego, when we listen to the ego, when we don't surrender, when we listen to the ego, we're going to be living in the future, we're going to be living in the past, we're not going to be living presently. When we just surrender to the unique expression of our ego, of our self, right? The ego and the self, the soul, become one, right? The ego and the soul become one when we surrender. And this comes through flow, this comes through love. You see the best artists, the best creators on our planet surrender. And the ego and the self become one. And it's a divine expression, a divine creation, divine manifestation of the creation. I love watching people who are in tune, musicians specifically. And when you see a musician up on stage, take John Mayer, for example. I love John Mayer. And I was at a Dead & Co show and he's up on stage and he disappears. John Mayer leaves. And whoever's playing guitar, he's just letting it flow through him. Sure, he's John Mayer, the ego, on the stage, but he also is playing with soul. And that's what's leading a soulful life. When we lead a soulful life, we're letting the ego take a step aside. We're letting the ego align with our soul's intention, our truth. And the ego and the soul become one, and we have an awesome, divine expression of creativity, of life itself, of love itself. So the ego is not meant to be killed. The ego is not an enemy. The ego is your best friend. When you go to bed at night, you only have yourself when you roll over to the other side of the bed. No matter who is next to you. Doesn't matter. You only ever have yourself. So befriend your ego. Love your ego. Accept, love, and forgive every aspect of your ego. And ask yourself these deep questions on this spiritual path to gain a deeper understanding, a deeper acceptance for who you are incarnate in this human body. Because we're all figuring this out on our own time, and there's no one path. There's an infinite amount of paths, and they all come back to one. They all come back to one. We experience this separation from a place of duality. We experience the illusion of Maya from this human body, but ultimately we return back to source. We return back to the one cosmic organism, the living, breathing Tao. We return to that. Some people call it God, some people call it source, some people call it the divine, some people call it whatever they call it. Brahman. It's one. All of this is one, and we are experiencing duality through the lens of the ego. And my ego, his name is Corey Engelhart, and I create all sorts of videos on self-realization, spiritual awakening, consciousness, and all things that bring us closer to ourselves and the divine. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, talking about the ego today. And I've got all sorts of videos about consciousness, self-realization. You know the deal below. So click below. We got so many more. Come hang out with me. Click subscribe. I'm uploading every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm dropping a book soon. It's called Be As You Are, and it'll be out for pre-order so soon. Thank you so much for being here with me. So much love, so much peace, and Adonai. Namaste.